I never thought a rubber duck would be the last straw. But there it was, floating in my mailbox with a note saying, "Thanks for the farm, cousin." $5 million. That's what my family's duck farm was worth when I inherited it from my father. 3 generations of Hardings had raised waterfowl on that land in rural Oregon. My cousin Derek hadn't spoken to me in 15 years, not since our big fight at Thanksgiving 2010. But when he showed up at my door last year claiming he was broke and needed a place to stay, I remembered what Dad always said. Family is family, even when they're ruffling your feathers. So I did something crazy. I let Derek move into the farmhouse, and eventually, after he seemed to turn his life around, I put his name on the deed alongside mine. "We're family," I told him. "This place should stay with blood." 2 months later, he sold the entire operation to a luxury resort developer without my knowledge. Turns out there was a clause in our agreement I hadn't noticed. He could sell his portion without my consent. When I confronted him about it, all he said was, "Business is business, Jim, nothing personal." What Derek didn't know was that I had leverage, a family secret that would turn his new fortune into a worthless pile of legal troubles. I was about to unleash 30 years of buried truth that would change everything. The Harding family has been a fixture in Wasco County since my grandfather Ellis bought that marshy plot back in 1945 after returning from the Pacific. He'd seen enough blood and decided to raise something peaceful, ducks. Not just any ducks, but the finest Pekin ducks that would eventually supply high-end restaurants from Portland to San Francisco. "Duck people are honest people," Grandpa Ellis would say. "They work with the seasons, not against them." Dad expanded the operation in the 70s when organic farming was still considered hippie nonsense. He was ahead of his time, marketing our birds as naturally raised, decades before it became trendy. Our Thanksgiving tables were always laden with everything but duck. We ate turkey like everyone else. "Never eat what pays your mortgage," Dad would joke. Derek was Uncle Raymond's son. Raymond was Dad's younger brother who never quite found his footing. He drifted between jobs in California, occasionally showing up for Christmas with expensive gifts he couldn't afford, and stories about business ventures that never materialized. When Raymond died of a heart attack at 52, Derek was just finishing college. That summer, Dad insisted Derek come work at the farm. "Family takes care of family," he said, though I could tell he was trying to give Derek the structure his father never provided. Derek was smart but restless. He had ideas about modernizing the farm that Dad resisted. I remember one particularly brutal argument during a family picnic by the lake when I was 30 and Derek was 24. Derek had drawn up plans to convert half our operation into an agritourism destination with tours and a farm-to-table restaurant. "You're sitting on a gold mine and running it like it's 1950, Derek shouted. Dad remained calm, sipping his beer. "Not everything needs to be monetized to its fullest potential, son." "That's why the Hardings will always be small time," Derek sneered, looking straight at me. "Jim here is just waiting to inherit mediocrity." The family went silent. Mom nervously rearranged the potato salad. Dad just nodded and said, "When you've raised something from an egg and watched it grow, you might understand there's value beyond dollars." The humiliation burned inside me, not just because Derek had insulted my future, but because part of me wondered if he was right. Was I just the dutiful son lacking vision? That Thanksgiving of 2010 was when everything imploded. Derek had gotten into some trouble with investors in Portland, something about misappropriated funds. He came to the farm asking Dad for a loan to settle some misunderstandings. Dad refused, saying he wouldn't enable Derek's shortcuts. The argument escalated until Derek, red-faced and drunk on holiday bourbon, knocked over Mom's china cabinet. 4 generations of heirlooms shattered across the hardwood floor. "You all think you're better than me because you play by the rules," Derek spat. "But the rules were made by people who already have what they want." Dad did something then I'd never seen before. He wrote a check for $50,000 and handed it to Derek. "This isn't a loan. It's a severance package. Take it and don't come back to this farm." What Derek didn't know, what none of us knew then, was that Dad had made a grand gesture years earlier. After Uncle Raymond died, Dad had quietly paid off Raymond's substantial gambling debts to protect Derek's inheritance and reputation. He'd mortgaged part of the farm to do it, working double shifts for years to pay it back. Dad swore me to secrecy, saying, "Derek deserves a clean slate, not charity he'd resent." For 15 years after that Thanksgiving, Derek never called, never visited. Dad passed away in 2020, leaving me the farm, now debt-free and thriving. Mom followed 6 months later. I threw myself into the work, expanded our organic certification, and eventually the property's value hit that magic $5 million mark. I was alone with my ducks and my memories until Derek reappeared on my doorstep last spring, claiming he'd changed. If only I'd remembered that ducks may migrate, but they rarely change their nature. Last April, I was inspecting the new incubators when a rental car kicked up dust in the driveway. I barely recognized Derek at first. His once thick hair was thinning, and his designer clothes had been replaced with a worn jacket and jeans. He had the look of a man who'd been sleeping in his car. "Jim," he said, extending his hand, "long time." I didn't shake it. "What brings you here after 15 years?" He sighed heavily, his shoulders slumping. "I've made a mess of things, cousin. Investment went south in Arizona. Divorce took half of what was left. I'm out of options." Something in his eyes reminded me of Uncle Raymond, that same wounded pride mixed with desperation. I let him stay in the old foreman's cottage, telling myself it was temporary. Dad's voice echoed in my head, "Family takes care of family." Over the next few months, Derek surprised me. He woke before dawn, learned the feeding schedules, and modernized our bookkeeping system. He connected us with some high-end chefs in Seattle who paid premium prices for our ducks. By August, our profits had increased 30%. "You were right about some things," I admitted one evening as we sat on the porch, watching the sunset over the ponds. "The farm needed updating." "And you were right to preserve its soul," Derek replied, sipping his beer. "I didn't understand that before." By November, I'd made a decision. I asked my lawyer to draw up papers making Derek co-owner of a 40% stake in the farm. "We're the last Hardings," I told him when I presented the documents. "This place should stay in the family." Derek hugged me, his eyes wet. "You won't regret this, Jim, I promise." In February, we hosted the annual Willamette Valley Farmers Association dinner at the farm. It was the first big gathering since COVID, and everyone was there. The Millers with their hazelnut orchard, the Westerbys with their sheep operation, and the Jacobsons, third-generation wheat farmers. Even Mayor Pullman made an appearance. Derek was in his element, charming everyone with his knowledge of agricultural tax credits and sustainable farming practices. I overheard him telling the Jacobsons, "Family farms are America's backbone. Jim and I are committed to preserving that legacy." I was refilling the wine table when I noticed Derek in an intense conversation with Blake Richardson, a developer known for buying up farmland for luxury rural retreats. They quickly separated when they saw me approaching. "Just catching up with an old college acquaintance," Derek explained, too casually. That night, I found a business card in the bathroom trash, Richardson Development Group, with a handwritten note. "Final offer, 7.2 M. Need answer by Friday." I confronted Derek in the kitchen. "You planning on telling me about Richardson's offer?" "It's nothing serious," Derek said, washing dishes with his back to me. "Just exploring options. The farm's land value has skyrocketed. We could sell a small parcel and invest in expanding operations elsewhere." "This land isn't just an asset," I said. "It's our heritage." Derek turned, his expression hardening slightly. "Heritage doesn't fund retirement, Jim. You're nearly 60. Have you thought about your future?" The question stung because I hadn't. The farm was my future, always had been. "We're not selling," I said firmly, "not even a parcel." Derek nodded, conciliatory. Of course, it was just an idea. 2 weeks later, I flew to Minneapolis for the National Organic Farmers Convention. Derek insisted I go, the first vacation I'd taken in years. "I've got everything covered," he assured me. On my third day there, I received a text from Marianne Jacobson. "Is it true? Whole Valley's talking about it." I called her immediately. "About what?" Her voice was hesitant. "The sale. Everyone's saying you and Derek sold to Richardson."
They're planning some kind of luxury duck hunting resort. My blood ran cold. That's impossible. I never agreed to any sale. I caught the first flight home, calling my lawyer repeatedly during layovers. He finally answered as I landed in Portland. "Jim, I've been trying to reach you. Derek presented paperwork showing he had your power of attorney. The sale closed yesterday, $5.2 million. I thought it was strange, but everything seemed in order." I drove straight to the farm, hands shaking on the wheel. The familiar Harding Duck Farm, Est 1945, was already gone, replaced with a glossy banner, "Coming soon, Willamette Waters Resort and Spa." Derek's car was gone. The farmhouse door stood open. Inside, he'd cleared out everything of value. Dad's antique decoy collection, Mom's silver, even the framed first dollar the farm ever earned. On the kitchen table sat a rubber duck, the cheap kind you'd find in a dollar store, with a note, "Thanks for the farm, cousin. You always were too trusting. Like father, like son." It was then I discovered the truth. Derek hadn't just convinced me to add his name to the deed. He'd slipped in a clause giving him unilateral selling rights. My lawyer later admitted he'd never seen such skillfully deceptive paperwork. Derek had been planning this from the moment he arrived, playing the role of the reformed family man. I sat at that empty kitchen table for hours, the rubber duck mocking me. The ducks in the ponds outside were now technically property of Richardson Development Group. 3 generations of Harding work gone. But as night fell, something hardened in me. There was one thing Derek didn't know, one secret Dad had taken to his grave that only I knew. A secret that would turn Derek's victory into ashes. I had 72 hours before we had to vacate the property. Richardson's people would arrive Monday to begin preliminary surveys for the resort. The county was buzzing with the news, some lamenting the loss of a historic farm, others excited about potential jobs the resort would bring. I made one call to my father's old friend, Judge Howard Mercer. "I need to know if it's where Dad said it would be," I told him. "Ellis Harding's safe deposit box," the judge confirmed. "It's still there at First National. Arthur made me promise never to mention it unless you ask directly." Sunday afternoon, the Willamette Valley Agricultural Heritage Society was holding its centennial celebration at the Grange Hall. Derek would be there. He wouldn't miss the opportunity to flaunt his newfound wealth among the very people whose way of life he'd betrayed. I spent Saturday at the bank, then preparing what I needed. The weight of Dad's secret pressed heavily on me, but also gave me strength. When I walked into the Grange Hall on Sunday, conversations hushed. Farmers who'd known me since childhood looked away uncomfortably. Others approached with awkward condolences as if the farm had died. "It's a shame what happened," Bill Westerby said, gripping my shoulder. "Your dad would be heartbroken." I spotted Derek by the bar, holding court in an expensive suit, Blake Richardson at his side. They were showing something on a tablet to Mayor Pullman and several business owners, probably renderings of the resort that would replace my family's legacy. Derek faltered mid-sentence when he saw me. A flash of guilt crossed his face before he recovered, raising his glass. "Jim, didn't expect to see you here. Thought you'd be packing." The room went silent. I walked slowly toward him, feeling every eye on us. "Wanted to congratulate you personally," I said, my voice steady. "Quite an achievement, stealing a family farm." Derek's smile tightened. Business, Jim, nothing personal. You could have sold years ago and lived comfortably. I just helped you make the smart choice. Always the shortcuts with you, I said, just like your father. His face darkened. Leave my father out of this. At least he lived life on his own terms, not hiding behind some ducks. Your father, I said, loud enough for everyone to hear, died owing gambling debts to some very dangerous people in Reno. Debts that would have come after you. Derek's expression froze. What are you talking about? I pulled out a folder from my jacket. Dad paid off $287,000 to protect you, mortgaged the farm to do it, worked himself nearly to death for 5 years to pay it back. Derek's face drained of color. You're lying. I laid out the documents on the table, loan papers, canceled checks, letters from collection agencies, all with Raymond Harding's name. He did it so you wouldn't start life with that burden. He called it giving you wings, not anchors. Murmurs spread through the crowd.
Derek glanced around, sensing the shift. Even if that's true, he said, lowering his voice, it doesn't change anything now. The sale is final. I smiled for the first time. Not quite. I pulled out another document, yellowed with age, bearing the county seal. This is the original deed to Harding Farm, the one Grandpa Ellis filed in 1945. I handed it to Judge Mercer, who had appeared beside me. He studied it, then nodded gravely. The northwestern 60 acres of the property, I continued, were designated under the Wetland Conservation Act of 1977 as protected habitat. Dad registered it privately, never made it public because he didn't want restrictions on how we farmed. But it means those 60 acres, including the main pond system and farmhouse, can never be commercially developed. Richardson pushed forward. That's impossible. Our environmental survey was incomplete, Judge Mercer interrupted. This designation is binding. I helped Arthur file it myself. I turned to Richardson. Your resort just lost its waterfront and its access road. And according to state law, you'd need to create a 20-acre buffer zone around protected wetlands. That leaves you about 15 acres of usable land on the rocky side of the property. The color drained from Richardson's face as he snatched the tablet, furiously recalculating. The sale is valid, he finally said, but the terms have fundamentally changed. This is misrepresentation. I shrugged. Take it up with your business partner. I never signed anything. Derek lunged forward, grabbing my shirt. You knew! You let me sell worthless land! I removed his hand calmly. Not worthless, just not what you promised. The difference between honesty and shortcuts. I turned to leave, but stopped at the door. One more thing, Derek. Dad's will had a specific provision I never told you about. If any portion of the farm ever left family ownership, a trust would activate, revealing everything about Uncle Raymond's dealings. Copies of those documents were sent this morning to the Oregon Securities Division and the FBI. Derek's face went from angry to terrified. What documents? The ones showing how Uncle Raymond embezzled from his investment partners, and how you helped him hide the money before he died. Dad knew, Derek. He kept the evidence to protect you, as long as you stayed away from the farm. As realization dawned on Derek's face, I walked out into the spring sunshine, leaving behind the shocked whispers and Derek's crumbling world. Outside, the distant sound of ducks calling from the ponds, my ponds again soon, was sweeter than any music I'd ever heard. The fallout was swift and messy. By Tuesday, Richardson Development Group had filed suit against Derek for misrepresentation, demanding their money back plus damages. Their lawyers descended on the property like vultures, taking measurements and photographs, growing increasingly agitated as they confirmed what I'd revealed. The northwestern 60 acres, the heart of the farm with the main pond system, was indeed protected wetland, rendering their luxury resort plans impossible. We could still build on the eastern parcel, one architect suggested half-heartedly, studying the topography maps. And have guests stare at a marsh, Richardson snapped. Without water access, this project is dead. I stayed in the foreman's cottage, watching the proceedings with quiet satisfaction. By Friday, Richardson had withdrawn his construction permits and was negotiating an unwinding of the sale. Derek had vanished completely, along with the $5.2 million payment. Sheriff Collins visited me that weekend. "Jim, I need to talk to you about Raymond and Derek Harding," he said, settling onto my porch with a cup of coffee. "The FBI's asking questions about some old financial dealings." "I've told them what I know," I said truthfully. This was another part of Dad's careful planning. He'd prepared a sealed statement with Judge Mercer, detailing what he knew about Raymond and Derek's financial schemes, to be released only if the farm left family hands. "Did you know," Sheriff Collins asked, "about the embezzlement?" I shook my head. Dad protected me from that knowledge, said it was his burden to carry, not mine. The sheriff nodded. "They'll probably find Derek eventually. Seems he's had practice disappearing with other people's money." What surprised me most in the following weeks were the visits. Bill Westerby brought a casserole his wife had made. "Thought you might need some home cooking with everything going on." The Jacobsons came with their sons, offering to help with the spring maintenance I'd fallen behind on. Even Mayor Pullman stopped by. "The town council is establishing a historical agricultural district designation," she explained. "Your farm would be the centerpiece. It would mean tax benefits and some grant opportunities." I was touched, but confused. Why now? She looked embarrassed. "We should have done this years ago. Sometimes it takes almost losing something to recognize its value." By mid-June, Richardson had backed out completely, returning the property to Harding ownership through a complex legal arrangement that left me with considerably more debt than before, but with my farm intact. The 60 protected acres were mine again. The remainder was in legal limbo until Derek could be found. Then came the most unexpected turn. On a rainy Tuesday morning, a luxury SUV with California plates pulled into my driveway. A woman in her 30s stepped out, holding a manila envelope and looking nervously at the farmhouse. "Mr. Harding, I'm Julia Winters. Raymond Harding was my father." I nearly dropped the feed bucket I was carrying. Raymond never mentioned having a daughter. Her smile was sad. He wasn't much for mentioning family, or maintaining connections. I only saw him a handful of times growing up. Over coffee in the kitchen, Julia explained that she'd tracked me down after seeing news about the farm sale and Derek's subsequent disappearance. "Derek's my half-brother, though we've never met," she said. "When I saw the stories, I started digging into family history." She slid the envelope across the table. Inside were documents, birth certificates, photos, and letters between Raymond and her mother. "Mom kept everything," Julia said, "including this." She handed me a sealed letter, yellowed with age, addressed to Arthur Harding, to be opened in case of my death. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside was my uncle's handwriting. "Arthur, if you're reading this, I'm gone, probably owing you money again. There's something you should know. The Reno debts aren't just gambling. I took money from some dangerous people for an investment opportunity. Derek helped me move the funds. If anything happens to me, they might come looking. Keep Derek away from the farm. It's the first place they'll check. And if you can, look out for Julie. She deserves better than the father I've been. Ray." I looked up at Julia, seeing Raymond in her eyes. "Did you know about this?" She shook her head. "Mom kept me away from his business dealings. She just said he made bad choices." "Why are you showing me this now?" Julia's expression hardened slightly. "Because Derek contacted me last week, tried to convince me to claim a share of the farm as Raymond's daughter, said we could work together to reclaim our inheritance. I laughed bitterly. There's more debt than inheritance at this point. I figured, she nodded, but I wanted you to know what he's planning. And, she hesitated, I wanted to see the place. Mom used to tell me stories about visiting the farm as a girl, said it was the most peaceful place she'd ever known. I studied her face, Raymond's eyes, but lacking his restless dissatisfaction. Would you like a tour? I offered. That tour changed everything. Julia walked the property with genuine interest, asking intelligent questions about the operation. She held a duckling with careful hands, laughing as it nuzzled her palm. I studied environmental science in college, she mentioned as we walked along the protected wetland, specialized in water conservation systems. By the end of her visit, an idea had formed. The farm needs help, I told her, and your family, whether Raymond acknowledged it or not. 3 months later, Julia moved into the renovated foreman's cottage. We established a new ownership structure, Harding Heritage Farm, LLC, with Julia as operations manager and future co-owner. Her expertise helped us secure grants to enhance the wetland conservation area, creating an educational component that brought school groups and environmental tourists. As for Derek, the FBI caught up with him in Arizona. The money was mostly gone, gambling debts and bad investments, following his father's pattern. He faced charges for fraud and his role in Raymond's old schemes. I visited him once at the county detention center. He looked older, diminished. Came to gloat? He asked without looking up. Came to tell you Julia's working at the farm now, I said. Your half-sister's helping save what you tried to destroy. His head snapped up. Julie? Raymond's kid? She's a Harding, a better one than either of us, probably. Derek was silent for a long moment. Dad always said that farm would be worth millions someday. It is, I replied.
Just not in the way he meant. As I turned to leave, Derek called after me. That stuff about Dad's gambling debts, did your father really pay them off? I paused at the door. Family takes care of family, Derek, even when they don't deserve it. Last month, we held the first Harding Farm Festival, showcasing sustainable agriculture and wetland conservation. Over 1,000 people came. The highlight was releasing 20 rehabilitated wild ducks into our protected pond, ducks that had been rescued after an oil spill downstream. As I watched them take to the water, surrounded by neighbors and friends and with Julia beside me, I finally understood what Dad meant all those years ago. The farm's true value was never in its market price, but in what it preserved, a way of life, a piece of nature, and most importantly, a place where family could find its way home, even after the worst betrayals. The rubber duck Derek left as a final insult now sits on my desk. Julia painted it to look like one of our pecans and wrote across the bottom, "Worth more than millions." She was right. So here I am, approaching 60, with a duck farm that's both smaller and greater than it once was. The eastern parcel eventually sold, not to developers, but to the County Land Trust as a permanent conservation area. Julia's research helped secure the designation, bringing both preservation and financial stability to Harding Heritage Farm. Derek served 18 months for fraud before being released. He hasn't contacted us, though Julia sends him updates and photos occasionally. She believes in second chances more than I do. Maybe that's why she's taking over more of the day-to-day operations while I focus on what I love most, raising the finest pekin ducks in the Northwest. I've learned that inheritance isn't just about land or money. It's about values that sustain you when everything else is stripped away. Dad knew that. It's why he protected the wetlands, paid Raymond's debts, and left me the tools to reclaim our legacy when it was nearly lost. That rubber duck still sits on my desk, a reminder that sometimes what looks like humiliation is just the beginning of redemption, and that family, real family, is defined by actions, not blood. If you've ever faced betrayal or lost something precious, remember, it's not the end of your story. It might just be the first chapter of something better.
Sometimes you have to lose what you thought you wanted to discover what you truly need. If you found something valuable in my story, hit that subscribe button and share it with someone who might need to hear it. We're all just trying to find our way home to what matters. Thanks for listening, and remember, even the smallest duck can make the biggest